Imagine a strip of land, no bigger than some American states, sitting between the Mediterranean Sea and the deserts of the Middle East, yet carrying the weight of thousands of years of faith, conquest, and bloodshed. This is the birthplace of three of the world's great monotheistic religions, and also the epicenter of one of the most enduring conflicts in human history, the struggle between Israelis and Palestinians. Before we dive into modern politics or breaking news headlines, we have to journey back, not just a few decades, but thousands of years. Because what's happening today is rooted in a story that began long before the age of tanks, rockets, and peace treaties. It's a story of promises believed to be divine, of empires rising and falling, and of people who carried their identities across centuries of exile. From patriarchs to kingdoms. Around the 17th century BC, according to biblical tradition, three figures, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, received what they believed was a calling from God. They settled in a region called Canaan, an area that would roughly correspond to today's Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, parts of Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. This wasn't just land to them, it was the Promised Land, a place where God's covenant would unfold. Fast forward to about 1000 BC, and the Israelites had formed a united monarchy. King Saul began the kingdom, King David established Jerusalem as the capital, and King Solomon built the first temple, a structure that became the beating heart of Jewish faith and culture. But even then, unity was fragile. After Solomon's death, the kingdom split in two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Here's where history becomes a cycle of power and loss. One empire after another, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, and finally the Romans, conquered this land. The Romans, in an attempt to sever the Jewish link to it, renamed Judah as Palestine. It was a move as political as it was symbolic, and it would echo through history. Jerusalem, the city everyone wants. By the 7th century AD, Islam had emerged and the Arab conquests swept across the region. The Dome of the Rock was built on the ruins of the Jewish Second Temple, making Jerusalem sacred not just to Jews and Christians, but also to Muslims. Imagine one city holy to three faiths, each with deep emotional claims to it. That's a recipe for both awe and conflict. Centuries later, when the Seljuk Turks restricted Christian access to the city, European crusaders launched brutal campaigns to reclaim it. These crusades saw rivers of blood, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish alike. And yet each group believed their cause was righteous. Empires and a rising dream. From the 1500s until World War I, the Ottoman Empire ruled the land. But while the Holy Land sat under Ottoman control, a new idea was brewing in Europe. Zionism, the belief that Jews should return to their ancestral homeland and form a national state. This wasn't born in a vacuum. It came at a time when anti-Semitism was rampant in Europe. By the early 20th century, tens of thousands of Jews began migrating back to the land. Some came with hope, some with desperation, and all with the dream of safety and belonging. But the land was not empty. It was home to an Arab population that had been living there for centuries. And this is where the modern conflict begins to take shape. Britain's mandate and the ticking clock. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I, Britain took control of Palestine under what was called the British Mandate. The British, through the Balfour Declaration, had promised to support the creation of a Jewish homeland. At the same time, they had made promises to Arab leaders about independence. This double dealing planted seeds of mistrust that still bear bitter fruit today. By the 1930s, Jewish migration increased sharply, especially as Jews fled Nazi persecution in Europe. The Holocaust would later claim 6 million Jewish lives, and those who survived often had nowhere to go but Palestine. But the more Jews arrived, the more tensions with the Arab population escalated, often erupting into violence. Britain, overwhelmed and unable to satisfy either side, began preparing to leave. But before they withdrew, the United Nations proposed a partition plan: 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab, and Jerusalem as an international city. To Jewish leaders, it was an imperfect but necessary chance at sovereignty. To Arab leaders, it was a betrayal, giving the Jewish minority more than half of the land. The plan was rejected, and the stage was set for open war. In the next part, we'll walk into the turbulent decades of war, displacement, and uneasy peace talks, and explore real stories from families on both sides who lived through them. The year was 1948. Britain had packed its bags, the UN partition plan had been rejected by the Arab states, and Jewish leaders had declared the birth of the State of Israel. For many Jews, this was the culmination of a 2,000-year-old dream, a homeland, a refuge, and a promise fulfilled. But for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, it was the beginning of what they would call al-Nakba, the catastrophe. The First Arab-Israeli War. Within hours of Israel's declaration of independence, armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded. What followed was the First Arab-Israeli War, a brutal conflict that reshaped the map and displaced over 700,000 Palestinians from their homes. Many fled with the keys to their houses still in their pockets, believing they would return in weeks. Most never did. The war ended with Israel holding more territory than the UN had allotted, while Jordan took control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt claimed the Gaza Strip. Borders hardened, refugee camps swelled, and a deep wound formed, one that has never truly healed. I remember meeting a Palestinian man in his 80s in a refugee camp outside of Ramallah. His family still kept the wrested key to their house in Jaffa, a city they fled in 1948. He told me, "This key is not just metal, it's my proof that we belonged there." Across the world, in Tel Aviv, I once interviewed an Israeli woman whose parents survived Auschwitz. Her mother said, "We came here with nothing, but here we could breathe without fear." 2 stories, both true, both tragic, locked in a collision that feels impossible to untangle. The Six-Day War and shifting power. Jump to 1967. Tensions had been rising again, fueled by border clashes, Palestinian guerrilla raids, and Arab states' declarations to wipe Israel off the map. In June, Israel launched a preemptive strike that would become known as the Six-Day War. In less than a week, Israel seized the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. For Jews, regaining Jerusalem's old city, including the Western Wall, was a moment of profound spiritual triumph. For Palestinians, it was another crushing blow, placing all of historic Palestine under Israeli military control. The war also brought another wave of displacement, adding to the already staggering refugee crisis. Here's where geopolitics becomes deeply personal. For Palestinians living under occupation, daily life now included checkpoints, land seizures, and military rule. For Israelis, the memory of being surrounded by hostile armies and winning reinforced the belief that strength was the only path to survival. Peace attempts and shattered hopes. The following decade saw attempts at peace that seemed promising on paper, but often collapsed in reality. In 1979, Egypt became the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel, returning the Sinai in exchange for recognition. Then came the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, which many thought would finally deliver a 2-state solution. Handshakes were exchanged, Nobel Prizes awarded, but violence never truly stopped. One Israeli friend of mine, who was just a teenager during the Oslo years, told me, "We thought we'd be traveling to Ramallah for coffee by now." Meanwhile, a Palestinian acquaintance, who was a child in the same era, recalled, "We thought the checkpoints would disappear. Instead, there were more." The Intifadas, uprisings of desperation.
Palestinian frustration exploded in two major uprisings, known as the First and Second Intifadas. The first, from 1987 to 1993, was marked by mass protests, stone-throwing youths, and civil disobedience. The second, from 2000 to 2005, was far bloodier, with suicide bombings, Israeli military incursions, and thousands of deaths on both sides. The Intifadas deepened mistrust. To many Israelis, they confirmed the fear that Palestinians would never accept their state. To Palestinians, they were desperate cries against decades of occupation, economic hardship, and broken promises. Gaza, a powder cake. In 2005, Israel withdrew its settlers and military from Gaza, but it maintained control over its borders, airspace, and sea access. A year later, the militant group Hamas won Palestinian elections and eventually took control of Gaza, leading to a blockade by Israel and Egypt. Since then, the Strip has been the site of repeated wars, airstrikes, and rocket attacks, each round leaving civilians to pick up the pieces amid the rubble. If you've ever spoken to someone from Gaza, you know the reality is not just politics. It's the sound of drones overhead at night, the smell of dust after a building collapses, and the impossible choice between fleeing or staying when there's nowhere safe to go. In Part 3, we'll step into the present day, where technology, shifting alliances, and new religious tensions are shaping the next chapter, and where prophecy, for some, still plays a powerful role in how they see the endgame.
We live in an age where the Israel-Palestine conflict is no longer just about borders on a map. It's about narratives, symbols, and even prophecy. Depending on who you ask, this struggle is either an ancient biblical drama playing out in real time, or a human-made tragedy that could be solved if only there was enough political will. Shifting alliances in the Middle East. In recent years, we've seen something unexpected. Arab nations that once refused to even recognize Israel, now signing normalization agreements. The Abraham Accords brought the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan into open relations with Israel. Saudi Arabia, the region's heavyweight, hasn't officially joined, but the conversations are happening behind closed doors. Why the change? For many of these countries, Iran has replaced Israel as the biggest perceived threat. It's a geopolitical reshuffle that would have been unthinkable a generation ago, and it's reshaping the map of alliances in the Middle East. But here's the uncomfortable truth. While diplomats shake hands in luxury hotels, life on the ground for ordinary Palestinians often stays the same. Restricted movement, limited economic opportunities, and the feeling of being forgotten by the Arab world. Technology and modern warfare. This conflict has also entered the digital age. Wars are no longer fought just with tanks and jets, but with cyber attacks, drone strikes, and propaganda battles on social media. A viral video can sway global opinion almost as much as a battlefield victory. I once spoke to a young Israeli cybersecurity analyst who said, "My battlefield is a computer screen. I can stop a missile without ever touching a weapon." In Gaza, a Palestinian journalist told me, "My camera is my weapon. If I don't show the world what's happening, no one will believe me." It's a new kind of war, fought in hashtags, headlines, and hacked systems, but the human cost remains painfully old-fashioned. The religious dimension and the Third Temple. For millions around the world, Jerusalem is not just a political capital, it's the spiritual center of the universe. For some Christians, Jewish control over the city is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, a sign that the end times are near. Some Jewish groups are actively preparing for the rebuilding of the Third Temple, a move that would ignite massive religious and political backlash, because the site is currently home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's third holiest shrine. To many Muslims, any change to that status quo is seen as a direct attack on their faith. To many Jews, it's a long-awaited step toward divine destiny.
To Christians who read prophecy literally, it's the beginning of the final chapter of history. And to secular observers, it's a potential spark for a global crisis. Prophecy, politics, and the power of belief. Here's where it gets complicated. Beliefs shape actions. If enough people believe that a particular outcome is inevitable because God said so, they may act in ways that make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, theology can become geopolitics. This is why when you hear some leaders speak about the conflict, you're not just listening to political strategy. You're hearing centuries of religious interpretation echoing in their words. Stories from both sides. One of the most moving conversations I've ever had was with two fathers, one Israeli, one Palestinian, whose children were killed in the violence. Instead of turning to hatred, they joined a peace organization together. The Palestinian father told me, "If I let revenge rule me, my son dies twice." The Israeli father added, "We can't change the past, but maybe our grief can change the future." It's moments like these that remind me that while governments and armies shape the headlines, it's the small, human acts of courage that shape hope. What the future might hold. So, will there ever be peace? History teaches us to be cautious with optimism. The scars run deep, and the mistrust is generational. Yet history also shows us that change can come suddenly, from unexpected places. The truth is, the fate of this land will be determined not only by borders drawn in negotiation rooms, but by the stories people choose to tell and believe about one another. If the stories remain ones of fear and division, the cycle continues. But if they shift toward shared humanity, even a little, then maybe, just maybe, the future can look different. This conflict is often presented as black and white, good versus evil, victim versus oppressor. But reality is always more complex. When we listen only to confirm our own side, we miss the humanity in the other. And without seeing that humanity, peace will always remain a distant dream. As viewers, as people, and as storytellers, we have a choice. Do we amplify division, or do we plant seeds of understanding? Because in a land where history is measured in thousands of years, even small seeds can grow into something bigger than we can imagine.